You stand at the entrance of a narrow tunnel. The ceiling is so low you will have to crawl. The air inside is thick and damp. You can hear water dripping somewhere in the darkness ahead. You are holding a small oil lamp that barely lights 3 feet in front of you. Your job is to go into that tunnel alone and stay there for the next 12 hours. You will sit in complete darkness most of the time to conserve oil. You will listen for the sound of carts approaching. When you hear them, you will open a wooden door built into the tunnel wall so the carts can pass through. Then you will close it again and sit in the dark. You are 8 years old. There is no adult with you. No one will check if you are safe. If the tunnel collapses, if you fall asleep and miss a cart, if something goes wrong, you are on your own. This is not a punishment. This is your job, and you do it because, if you do not, men will die in explosions caused by gas buildup in the mine. You are the only thing standing between them and death. This was reality in Britain and America during the 18 and early 1900s, a time when coal mining was one of the most dangerous industries in existence, and safety depended on systems that were primitive and brutal. Mines required ventilation to prevent the buildup of explosive gases like methane and carbon monoxide. Without airflow, miners would suffocate or be killed in massive explosions. The solution was a series of air doors built throughout the mine tunnels. These doors had to remain closed to direct airflow properly, but they also had to be opened when coal carts and miners needed to pass through. Someone had to operate those doors, and that someone was almost always a child. These children were called trappers, and they were hired as young as 5 or 6 years old. They sat alone in the dark for 12 to 16 hours a day, opening and closing doors, ensuring that air moved correctly through the mine. Without them, the entire operation would fail. They did this job so adult miners could work safely, and they paid for it with their childhood, their health, and often their lives. His name was Arthur. He was 7 years old when he became a trapper. He lived in a small mining town in northern England with his mother, father, and 3 younger siblings. His father worked in the coal mine as a hewer, the men who actually cut the coal from the rock face. The pay was barely enough to feed the family. When Arthur turned 7, his father told him it was time to start working. The mine was hiring trappers. The job paid a few pennies a day, but every penny mattered. Arthur did not want to go. He was afraid of the dark. He had heard stories from other children about what it was like underground, but his father said the family needed the money, and Arthur had no choice. His mother cried the night before his first day, but she did not stop him from going. The next morning, Arthur walked with his father to the mine entrance. His father took him down the shaft, showed him the door he would be responsible for, and then left. Arthur was alone. The tunnel was narrow and cold. The door was a simple wooden frame with hinges that creaked when it moved. Arthur's job was to sit beside it and wait. When he heard the wheels of a coal cart or the footsteps of miners, he was supposed to pull the door open using a rope attached to the handle. After they passed, he closed it again. That was the entire job. But the reality was far worse than the description. The darkness was absolute. Arthur's small lamp provided almost no light, and he was told to use it sparingly because oil was expensive. So he sat in total blackness for hours at a time. He could not see his own hands. He could hear water dripping, the distant sound of pickaxes hitting rock, and sometimes the rumble of carts far away. But mostly, there was just silence. The kind of silence that made him hear his own heartbeat, that made him imagine things moving in the dark. He was terrified, but he could not leave. If he abandoned his post, miners could die and his father would lose his job. So Arthur sat there, shaking, trying not to cry, waiting for the sound of wheels. The work was monotonous and exhausting in a way that had nothing to do with physical labor. Arthur sat for 12 hours straight with almost no movement. His legs would go numb. His back would ache from sitting on cold stone. He was not allowed to fall asleep, but the darkness and the silence made it almost impossible to stay awake. He pinched himself. He bit his lip. He did anything to keep his eyes open. But sometimes he failed. He would drift off for a few seconds, then wake in a panic, terrified that he had missed a cart. Once, he did fall asleep and missed a coal cart. The driver screamed at him, calling him useless and threatening to report him. Arthur begged him not to. If he was reported, he would be beaten or fired, and his family could not afford that. The driver left, still shouting, and Arthur sat there crying in the dark, knowing he had to do better, but not knowing how. Arthur stopped being a child. Within weeks of starting the job, he became silent and withdrawn. He stopped playing with his siblings when he came home. He stopped talking at meals. He just ate whatever food his mother gave him and then collapsed into sleep. He had nightmares constantly. He would wake up screaming, thinking he was still in the tunnel, that the walls were closing in, that he was trapped. His mother tried to comfort him, but there was nothing she could say. The job was destroying him, and everyone knew it. But there was no alternative. The family needed his wages, so Arthur kept going back, day after day, descending into the dark, sitting alone, waiting. He stopped feeling like a person. He was just a door opener, a tool, nothing more. Think about this. Imagine being 7 years old and spending 12 hours a day alone in complete darkness, responsible for keeping miners alive with no support and no way out. Imagine your entire childhood being taken from you and replaced with fear, isolation, and exhaustion. Could a child today handle that? Could you have handled it? And what kind of society decides this is acceptable? The dangers were constant and deadly. Trappers died regularly from tunnel collapses, explosions, and flooding. Arthur's tunnel was unstable. He could hear the wood supports creaking. Sometimes small rocks would fall from the ceiling. He lived in constant fear that the entire thing would come down on him. Explosions were even more terrifying. If a trapper fell asleep and left a door open, gas could accumulate in the tunnels and ignite from a single spark. The explosion would rip through the mine, killing everyone in its path. Arthur heard about an explosion in a nearby mine where a trapper had fallen asleep. 17 men died. The trapper, a boy of 9, was found burned beyond recognition. The mine owners blamed him. His family received nothing. Arthur could not stop thinking about it. Every time he felt himself drifting off, he remembered that boy and forced himself awake. Another danger was flooding. Mines were often damp, and water would seep through cracks in the rock. Sometimes it would pour in suddenly, filling tunnels within minutes. Arthur's tunnel flooded once. He heard the water before he saw it, a rushing sound growing louder. He grabbed his lamp and tried to run, but the tunnel was too narrow and low. He had to crawl. The water was ice cold and rising fast. It reached his waist, then his chest. He thought he was going to drown. He made it to the main shaft just in time, gasping and shaking. Other trappers were not so lucky. A boy Arthur knew drowned in a tunnel 2 months later. His body was not recovered for 3 days. The mine reopened the next morning. Another child was hired to replace him. But here is what most people do not realize. Trappers were often the children of miners, and they were essentially forced into the job by economic necessity and family pressure. But mine owners preferred hiring children for this specific role because they could pay them a fraction of what they paid adults, and children were small enough to fit in the narrowest tunnels. It was not just about economics, it was deliberate exploitation. Mine owners knew the work was dangerous, isolating, and psychologically damaging, but children were cheaper and more controllable, so they kept hiring them. Arthur and thousands like him were sacrificed not because there was no alternative, but because the alternative was more expensive. Now think about this. Child labor still exists in parts of the world today. Children still work in mines, in factories, in fields, doing dangerous work for almost no pay. We know it happens. Does that bother you? Or is it easier to ignore because it is not happening in front of you? Most trappers did not last more than a few years. Their bodies broke down from sitting in cold, damp conditions. Their minds fractured from isolation and fear. Some died. Others became so sick or mentally unstable that they could not continue. Arthur lasted 4 years. By the time he was 11, he was a shadow of what he should have been. He was small for his age, malnourished, and constantly sick. He had chronic lung problems from breathing damp air and coal dust. His legs were weak from years of sitting. But the worst damage was psychological. Arthur barely spoke. He flinched at loud noises. He could not handle being in enclosed spaces outside of work. He had become so conditioned to the tunnel that he could not function anywhere else. Arthur's time as a trapper ended when the mine he worked in experienced a major collapse. Part of the tunnel system caved in, killing 12 miners and 3 trappers. Arthur was not in the collapsed section, but he was close enough to hear it. The sound was like thunder underground. The screams that followed were worse. Arthur ran to the main shaft, but there was nothing he could do. Rescuers spent days digging through rubble. They found some bodies. Others were never recovered. The mine was closed for 2 weeks, then reopened. Arthur was reassigned to a different tunnel, but he could not go back. He stood at the entrance on his first day back, and his body refused to move. He started shaking. He vomited. He could not breathe. His father dragged him home, furious, saying Arthur was being weak. But Arthur was not weak. He was broken. He never went back to the mine. Arthur lived for another 23 years, but he never recovered. He found occasional work as a surface laborer, but he was too damaged to hold any job for long. He drank heavily to numb the memories. He had violent nightmares that never stopped. He could not form relationships. He lived alone in a small room, barely surviving on charity and odd jobs. He died at 34 from pneumonia, his lungs too damaged from years underground to fight the infection. He was buried in an unmarked grave. No one attended his funeral. He was just another forgotten worker, one of thousands. Society needed coal. It powered factories, heated homes, and fueled the Industrial Revolution. And coal required trappers to keep miners safe. Arthur sat in the dark for 4 years so adult men could work without dying in explosions. He sacrificed his childhood, his health, and his future so the system could function. But society did not thank him. It used him up and moved on. There were thousands of trappers. Most died young or lived broken lives. Their work made industrial progress possible, but they were never acknowledged, never compensated, never remembered. The job eventually disappeared. Mechanical ventilation systems replaced human trappers. Child labor laws were passed, though enforcement was slow and uneven. But those changes came too late for Arthur and the children who died or were destroyed before protections existed. They suffered so future generations would not have to. Arthur is gone now. The mine where he worked has been sealed. The tunnels where he sat in darkness have collapsed or flooded. But the principle remains. Every comfort we have, every system that functions smoothly, was built on the suffering of people we never think about. Arthur sat alone in the dark so miners could work safely. He did a job so others would not have to, and it destroyed him. If you think being a trapper was the darkest job a child could do, there were others, jobs that were worse, jobs that killed faster, jobs that erased children completely before they ever had a chance to grow up.